Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me is my co-host, as always, Derek Cohen. He's our Chief Research Officer. Derek, we're going to jump right into it because we've got a special guest today. We've got Josh Treviño. Josh Treviño is our resident expert on all things Latin America, Mexico, border security, all kinds of different things involving that part of the world. And so because of everything that's going on here in what's going on in the nation right now, but really the LA riots, that's kind of the topic du jour everybody's really focused on. We thought we'd have you in to chat with us about what's going on and get your early reaction to that. So thank you, Josh, for having us.
Thanks for having me.
But of course, we always like to do something fun right at the top of the show. And so since it is June and we're getting into summer vacation time, I thought that I would, hopefully this doesn't get you in trouble and this isn't too controversial of a topic that, will reverberate at home. But I had to ask the controversial question: summer vacations with kids, because we all have young kids, fly or drive? Derek, do you prefer to fly with your kids, or do you prefer to drive with your kids, or do you prefer not to take a summer vacation at all?
Whatever the missus tells me to do.
Oh, that's the right answer.
No.
Okay.
No, it obviously all depends on. See, I'm a big driving guy. I don't mind driving at all. But it all depends on where you're going. Like if you're going to be in the car with the kids and it's going to be more than 6 hours, especially if it's going to be multiple days of that length, you're gambling with some bad money on that. So.
Josh, the trade-off there, of course, is, if you're driving with your kids, you can do whatever you want. They can act crazy and whatever. You can pull over. You can stop whenever you need to or
maybe
whatever.
In your car.
Yeah. But, of course, then you're driving 6 hours, like to Derek's point. Flying, of course, you get there a lot faster, but you have to get them through TSA or, whatever they need to do. And, of course, you're, out in the public and kids are running around the airport and everything. So which direction do you go?
Well, our story's a little bit different since both my kids are adopted from China. Like literally one of our first experiences with them was being in an aircraft for 15 hours.
Oh, wow.
Coming back to the United States. So everything's fine after that. To me, to us, the mode of transportation is less relevant than whether one brother can reach the other and antagonize him.
Regardless of where they are.
It doesn't really matter what the mode of transport is. So trains, Conestoga wagons, anything like that, as long as they have independent activities to do, it's all good.
So I think fly, but I only have one child at the moment. And so we will have a second child later on this year. And I think that's a big difference maker in probably answering this big debate.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that for this time next year then.
I'll be interested in your views on property damage after that happens too.
Yeah. Well, we're going to drive to Idaho. That'll probably end up with be where I am instead of fly. All right. Well, thanks for your comments on that. We'll take your comments at home if you have strong opinions about flying or driving. Shameless plug this week, as always, is The Post. It's our weekly newsletter that has everything that we're doing here at TPPF. It has some exclusive information or exclusive commentary from me, always some fun stuff about Texas. If you're not subscribed to that, do that right now and today at texaspolicy.com/The Post. Okay. All right. The big issue, Josh, thanks for being on the show and giving us. Yeah, and I had you on here. I wanted to have you on here because, a lot of us are kind of watching what's going on in the news, and it seems kind of like the same stuff that we've seen before, which is, there's some kind of, policy from conservatives or from Trump, and you get this big protest and this big, outrage and riots and whatever. We've seen this before with BLM a few years ago, and frankly on a lot of other issues. And I think a lot of times people just write this off as, oh, this is the left doing what the left does, and kind of the surface issues or whatever. But there's actually a lot under the surface. And so I'm going to go through the story here in a second, but I want to just get your sort of initial thoughts on kind of what do you think is going on or in terms of how the response has been versus what the left is saying and all that.
Yeah, well, talking about the violence in California, which appears to be spreading as we discuss this in other cities. Who knows what it'll be like. Hopefully it's not like summer 2020, which in my view was, just to put my cards on the table, was a full-scale insurrection that should have been treated as such. I'm a Senator Tom Cotton guy as far as that goes. But what we saw in California, very interesting. Apparently, the inception of the violence was actually not with an ICE raid versus illegal aliens. It was some kind of an anti-corruption effort that ends up sweeping up folks from the SEIU. What a surprise! And
anti-corruption, you say?
Yeah, with a public union. Who would have thought? And then it metastasized from there. And of course, now at this point, we've had several days of violence and looting throughout Los Angeles, and it has involved Obviously, it's drawn in the armed forces, which is very serious. And notably, and the reason I think we're here to talk is that we've seen a lot of folks out there with Mexican flags, Mexican nationals, embracing Mexican identity. I'm half Mexican. I like being half Mexican, but I think as Americans, like, we have to start asking some questions about what this means and what it signifies. And there's really two schools of thoughts on it. One is that, waving a Mexican flag is just what you do. Brian, I saw you waving an English flag just the other day.
I was not.
So, no. Oh, really? Wasn't you? Okay. And of course, your ethnicity is Ohioan, so you've got that out there. And so the question is it this? Is it this? Yeah, right. Is it this? That's not what deportivo means. The question is it an innocent expression, or is there something more malign beneath it? And I will tell you in full candor, if we'd been talking 15 years ago, I would have told you it was an innocent expression. I'm from South Texas. You see these things. But unfortunately, the more that you learn, and I'm happy to go in depth in it. I'll
we'll dig into that in just a second.
But the more that you learn, the more I think it is inescapable that there's something deeper involving our neighbor to the south that is behind the phenomenon, and it's something that ought to concern all Americans.
I'll stay with the riots real quick, because that's interesting that you have kind of an alternative account of what started this. This is what the official state media, NBC, says happened. Derek, can we get your thoughts on the debate here? Attention started Friday when ICE officers arrested over 40 immigrants targeting day laborers at a Home Depot parking lot, as well as the Ambience Apparel Clothing Manufacturer. And I want to put a pin in that, the Ambience Apparel Clothing Manufacturer, because this comes back to when we start talking about the cartels in Mexico. As news of the raid spread, relatives and protesters arrived to confront the federal agents who were making the arrests, these lawful arrests, right? So the protesters show up to confront the federal agents. Protesters tried to stop vehicles carrying detained immigrants and use other methods to block arrests. So they're trying to impede lawful arrests. Soon the clashes turned violent, with officers using pepper spray and batons, pushing crowds back with riot shields, and some protesters fled or retaliated. And then Trump called in the California National Guard on Saturday. And so there's this debate now where on the Trump side, they say, look, we were executing, Derek, a lawful arrest and investigation into these, what's going on at these, at the Home Depot and at the apparel place. The left says, well, if you didn't show up to arrest these people, then the protesters would have never been there, and that's what started so if you hadn't been there to enforce the law, there would have been no need for protesters, and therefore there wouldn't have been violence, and they blame Trump.
So if I understand it correctly, it is the proper course of law enforcement engaging in things that are undisputably within the president's powers is now provocative and fomenting of insurrection.
Right.
And this is so just beyond the pale, because you started seeing this with the judge in Massachusetts who tried the little Houdini act, or sneaking a person out the back of a courtroom. Again, if it'd be interesting to see that get tried here in Texas. But this idea that because you disagree with our immigration laws and that they are being enforced per every other standard that we have, that somehow is fascism, or that somehow is, the end of the republic, is just asinine. This is the most backwards, I would say, like left-pilled, understanding of how society works. And I don't understand, or how this, and again, I'm the one who laments the university quite frequently on this show. I don't understand how this went from dorm room bong rips coming up with this ideas to actually promulgating onto the general consciousness. But this is the fruit of that.
Also take issue, Josh, with the notion that these are protesters. Now, I understand protesting is well within your First Amendment right. And when most people think of protesters, you think of people organizing, marching down Congress Avenue or wherever in D.C. And saying, we don't like this policy and our voices need to be heard. I don't think of showing up to an active investigation and an active law enforcement activity or an arrest and screaming and yelling in a cop's face that he's doing the wrong thing. I don't think that's what most people think of as protecting your First Amendment right to protest.
Yeah, no, well, you're right. It's not what most people think, but it is what the left thinks. And I think it's important for us to understand that they inhabit a completely different moral and analytic universe than the rest of us. Those of them who have thought this through, which may be a minority, but there are those who are there. The parallel that they're going to draw to actions like this, in which they're impeding arrests, arrest. They're impeding lawful activity by ICE. Is actually mob action against the fugitive slave law in the, I think it was 1850, right? So in the 1850s, short version, federal marshals show up. They're apprehending escaped slaves in northern states, and they're bringing them back. And there are episodes, principally in New England, where crowds show up and they prevent federal agents from acting and executing what was lawful, but not a moral duty in this case. And so kind of the sleight of hand that they pull, of course, we understand that it is that it is moral to defend somebody escaping slavery. That's actually an example of virtuous action. It is not moral, and this is where we differ dramatically from our friends on the left, if they're friends at all at this point, where it is not moral to defend somebody who's in the country illegally, because that's a threat to law, order, and liberty in very different ways. And so what they're doing is they're taking a template and they're misapplying it in pretty significant ways, and they don't see that. They really do see the parallel between the illegal alien now, who is the virtuous oppressed, because it's the only categorization in which they think, and, for example, an enslaved person of the 1850s, which we know, because we're sane people, are totally different categories, but for them it's all one thing.
I want to keep going with the story, because this actually responds directly to that issue of they're doing it for more, or they're doing it in defense of these people who are in the country illegally.
Right.
Okay. So what we know about this particular operation is this is why I highlight the fact that they targeted not just the Home Depot, but this ambience apparel clothing manufacturer. Now, Los Angeles is well known. The garment district there, the fashion district there, is well known for housing businesses that are known to be money launderers for criminal enterprises, for criminal organizations, and it goes back a decade. I mean, all you have to do is Los Angeles garment district, money laundering, and you can find all kinds of cases going back over a decade. But the most recent one was actually in October of 2024. Two executives were found guilty by a jury of essentially laundering $8 million, millions of dollars, up to $17 million from running a scheme in which the company laundered money and failed to report on tax revenues of up to $17 million in cash transactions. Now, the way it works is that the cartels smuggle in the drugs. They sell all the drugs here, so they're sitting on a bunch of cash. They have these front operations, which are these garment warehouses, right? And so the money's sitting in the garment warehouses, and then they create these fake invoices where they buy stuff from China. So they essentially move the money back to China, which then either China sends the money directly to the cartels, or they send them all the drugs and the precursors for making the drugs. And that's how it works, is that the money's come in, the drugs come in, they sell the drugs here, the money then goes back to China, and they make these fake invoices. Well, that story's getting out now, that's actually what the operation was about, is that they were going into this garment district in this warehouse because the whole thing was a front for the cartels, right? And so this idea that ICE is just targeting illegal immigrants who are trying to make a life, a better life for themselves, or just trying to provide for their families. No, they're targeting an operation that is a front for international cartels. Yeah. That's what they were doing there, was taking out those people. Now, there may or may not be people who knew that, right? There may be people who were there just working. But the fact is, all of those people there that were arrested might have information that could then lead to stopping these cartel networks. I want to bring that up, Josh, because this goes right into what I think you have a lot of expertise on, and kind of can tell us the backstories, which is as you were alluding to earlier, is that what we're seeing now is not a protest because they're just, because they're arresting illegals. It's because the government is going after these money-making schemes by the cartels, and that's why you're seeing people get so active in trying to stop it.
Yeah. Well, right.
Sorry, that was a long thing, but I want to connect the dots for people.
No, but I think it's worth going through the long explanation, because this actually is an incredibly complicated topic. It's a complicated topic that has one simple cause, and I'll put the bottom line up front. The simple cause is that the Mexican state, the government, and its cartels are in alliance with one another. And so everything that we see resulting from that, human trafficking in this case, what we're talking about. When we say illegal aliens, we say illegal immigrants. I'll never say undocumented, because it's a lie in candor. It's misdirection. But we're talking about trafficked people throughout. And these people are trafficked by trafficking organizations that traffic these individuals to the United States, whether they're from Mexico or South America or Africa or Asia. It's almost irrelevant to them. But it's done specifically to create profit centers for remittances and also operations like this garment operation in Los Angeles that then feed cash, whether laundered or not, back into the points of origin, principally within Mexico. And exactly to your point, when you see ICE rolling up operations like this, but also when you see ICE just apprehending illegal aliens in general, whether or not they're connected to an operation like this, you're seeing strikes at profit centers throughout. If I can give just one example real quick, and I've told this story before on our Hard Country podcast and elsewhere, but about 3 years ago, I think it was fall 2022, I'm in Del Rio, Texas, with some of our colleagues, and I'm on. There's these paths through the cane on the north bank of the Rio Grande, and I come across in the cane this group of Venezuelans. It's 8 people, turn out to be Venezuelans. It's not always the best feeling when you're by yourself and you come across 8 folks, but these folks are actually pretty nice. So they sat down and told me they just crossed. They just had a coyote cross them in the river in I guess a little boat because they were all bone dry. And I offered them water. It was 106 degrees, and they told me after some conversations unfolded over about 20 minutes. They told me that they all had destinations already lined up in the United States. Several were going to Dallas, some were going to Portland, Oregon. That must have been a horrible.
Wow.
You might as well stay in Venezuela if you're going to do that. But the point was that the reason that they had destinations is not because they had family there or anything like that. It was because the trafficking networks that had shuttled them north already had wage earning positions lined up for them there. And the intent was to get them there, and then via remittances, they're going to serve as permanent profit centers, essentially an evil subscription model, for lack of a better term, for this. And so ICE and the Trump administration are disrupting all of this, which means that there's fiscal pressure on the traffickers, which means there's fiscal and political pressure on their state sponsors back in Mexico, and that's explaining a lot of what I think you're going to get into here.
Yeah. And Derek, I mean, back to that point about this is what people voted for. I mean, it's not like the Trump administration can just come out and say, "Hey, we kind of know that this was a cartel operation, and we're doing an investigation, and that's what this arrests are about." They can't come out and say that because they could give away their leads, or they could give away
compromising future investigations.
And so they maybe use the premise of illegal immigration to go in and bust up this stuff. So they can't exactly do that. But this is but they're going after the worst first, as Tom Homan likes to say. I mean, this is exactly what we all voted for, right?
Right, and that's where it also gets tough, because per Josh's story, it is really difficult to delineate a sob story illegal immigrant who might not have malice in their heart, but then serves as a low-level functionary of a transnational criminal organization. And I think that these lines being blurred don't help make the case, though we can talk about polling later on. The case seems to be made for itself pretty well. But the blurring of the lines really kind of takes the eye off the ball of what we're talking about itself, which is a suppression of international criminal activity. And so, actually, I'd like to pivot to Josh here on this, because I think one of the issues that we need to grasp with is, even though I think the Trump administration should be lauded for tackling this in such an aggressive fashion, as a student of foreign policy, I'm not really seeing a whole lot of top level pressure being exerted on the neighbors to the south. Do we know what's the holdup there? Because if we were more articulate, I mean, I made the same case about the tariffs. If we were more articulate about the end goal of what it is we're trying to do, I think that it would be a lot more well received. And in this case, I think that if we accurately paint the Mexican government as the malefactors that they are, it would be a lot better to have the cards on the table as we have these negotiations. Why have we really not seen more pressure, I guess, is the question.
This is the thing that occupies me day and night, professionally speaking. I want to start by saying the Trump administration has done more right than wrong, and if it ended here, I'm not just saying this pro forma, but it's true. If it ended here, it would still be the most positive relationship with the Mexican regime in probably about 20 years. George W. Bush also had a very positive relationship, but it was a different Mexican.
Damning with faint praise, but we'll take it.
No, but it was a different Mexican regime then. We need to understand that since 2018, Mexico has been on a path via its Moreno ruling party to become like Venezuela. And that's not supposition. That's not me mind reading. That's explicit. That's where they're headed. They're suppressing civil society. It's going to end up another Venezuela. And we're going to add Caracas to Havana, Managua, and then Mexico City along with all them. So that's unfortunate, but it's true. So to your point, I mean, here's what the Trump administration has done right. Obviously, with border enforcement, In terms of their relationship with the Mexicans, there's a lot of evidence that principally the Department of Defense has really taken a hard line with them. There has been credible reporting in the Wall Street Journal that I've had, I would say, soft confirmed by folks that we speak to in the policy world, that Secretary of Defense Hegseth in particular has been very direct with his Mexican counterparts that if they don't act against various cartel figures, that the United States will do the same. There's reporting today from Reuters. Sorry I didn't send it to you for show prep, but it was just an hour ago. Just an hour ago that I read it. But there's reporting today from Reuters that the United States has very quietly asked for the Mexicans to prepare extraditions for senior Morena figures. I don't know if the Mexicans will do it, but all this is positive. Hitting at the political class. We've denied visas to complicit political personnel, threatening military action, however obliquely. The big debate, though, and this gets to your point, the big debate that we see unfolding right now in governance, and I'm not speaking out of school on this because most of this is out in public, is whether or not fundamentally, there's a debate over the theory of what the Mexican state is. One theory, which is the one that I adhere to, holds that the Mexican state is fundamentally an antagonist. And again, I say this with regret, it's not my preference. Fundamentally an antagonist, fundamentally a left populist regime that is inimical to the United States and has to be treated as such. And in that framework, you have to go public and you have to undergird everything with hard power. That's just the reality.
And that was the footing from which I asked the question.
You're right. No, exactly. No, I understand. And frankly, I think that's where most of the American people are, honestly. I think that's the majoritarian American position. And you know who especially supports that theory is American Hispanics. 100%. But there's another theory, which is very popular, I'll say, inside the Beltway and inside, some corners of the State Department, unfortunately, which is that Mexico, they're wayward, they're a little bit corrupt, but they're fundamentally partners. We got to work with them. We can't alienate them. We can't cease cooperation with them. And this is the mindset that is going to lead us to bad ends, where we don't get the things that we need from our southern neighbor. And I'm very concerned about it. I'll tell you, and again, this is a story I told in the Hard Country, but I think it's worth telling here too. I'll tell the 30-second version. I had conversations with very, very good people who were in, I would say, the U.S. government apparatus in Mexico City within the past 2 years. I just want to be vague about it because these are good guys. I'm not disparaging them. These are public servants, individuals who have devoted their lives to law enforcement, to making our lives better. But they're very representative of kind of the State Department class writ large.
The foggy bottom mindset.
Yeah, sort of. The foggy bottom mindset, the diplomatic corps writ large. And so they would acknowledge that everything was going wrong, that the Mexicans are antagonistic to us, that the Mexican state is in bed with the cartels, that they're killing Americans, all these things that are manifestly true. And then you ask them, what's the solution? Well, the solution is we have to double down on our programs because, what if they stop cooperating with us? And of course, my answer is, okay, they stop cooperating with us. And I had a source text me afterwards, and he said, what did you think of the meeting? And I texted him back. I said, it is Saigon 1962. There's no strategy. Their only idea is to double down. There are elements, and I believe it includes the president himself within the Trump administration, who understand the problem correctly and want to do the right thing. But frankly, we know we're in the business of policy. There's a bureaucratic battle that has to be won first.
And you've published research here at TPPF, which if it's not concrete evidence necessarily, it's very, very strong evidence that in fact, going back to the current president's predecessor, that the Mexican government has been working hand in glove with the cartels. And there's a lot of public evidence of that we've published here. Talk a little bit about kind of where that relationship is right now. And do the inside the Beltway folks not realize that that's the case, or they just don't accept it?
Yeah. No. Well, look, Mexico's governance has always been corrupt. We have to understand that. Mm-hmm. So is the governance of New Jersey, by the way. And so, or Louisiana. I'm from South Texas.
Did they have a primary today?
Condescending. It was yesterday. Okay. Yeah. Don't ask me about that. I have strong opinions, believe it or not, on the New Jersey primary. But it's always been corrupt. What has changed since 2018 with the Morena regime coming into power, and what they've done since coming into power has been they've eliminated essentially all independent institutions of civil society. So they've stopped collecting data and statistics. They've essentially eliminated the independent judiciary. There's a lot of things that they've done. But there is evidence going back all the way to 2006 that the founding figure, who still is kind of the gray eminence of the party, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who was president of Mexico from 2018 to 2024.
AMLO to his friends.
AMLO to his friends, whose sons live in Houston, by the way, has been taking millions in cash from the Sinaloa cartel since at least 2006. And when you look at the pattern of action, I don't know if the show's long enough to go into this, but if you look at the pattern of action, when he's in power, before, since, it's very obvious. Like, the circumstantial case is so amazingly strong, and what we know of the direct case that's been gathered principally by U.S. sources, Department of Justice, is that is that it's a deadlock. Like honestly, were he not a former president of Mexico, he's somebody that we would be asking to extradite right now. It is that bad. And so the current president of Mexico, who's been in power since October 1st of 2024, Claudia Sheinbaum, I will say this, I have not seen evidence that she herself is personally corrupt, but everybody around her is. And the party apparatus is. I mean, look, the largest trafficking organization in Mexico is the Mexican Army. Everybody knows this. And when you go to Mexico and you talk to individuals, it is a known thing that the state and the cartels are one and the same. And so, why we don't acknowledge it, why we don't do anything about it, honestly, I could come up with 1,000 hypotheses. I think the simplest one, in Occam's razor, is that our policy has been on autopilot for 30 years, and there is as you know, and both of you know, in a variety of fields, whenever you introduce something transformative into a policy field, people don't want to do it primarily because it means you have to reassess everything, right? I mean, you got to overturn the premises. Well, I have to spend money on something I wasn't expecting, prison, whatever it is. It's the same way with Mexico too. If Mexico's not an ally, which it's not, if it's not a partner, which it's not, if it's an antagonist, which it is, that implies a lot of different things about defense spending, about U.S. strategic orientation, about how we treat migration, about our historic attitudes toward our southern neighbor, which have essentially been the same for about 100 years. And people, I think, from a human level, resist it.
So here's the terrifying thing about what you just explained, which I think this is why I'm looking at it. I hope our audience is now going to start looking at the riots and what's happening there and the way it's going down differently, is that there's, allegations I'll read from our friend John Daniel Davidson, who posted in the Federalist that that it's clear that Mexico, probably with or without the help of the cartels, Mexico is placing operatives here in the United States to be ready to carry out these kinds of initiatives when they get signals from Mexico City. Here's what John Daniel Davison wrote. Simply put, the Mexican flags flying in the streets of LA are not simply protest emblems or symbols of pride in one's heritage, as the New York Times laughably posits over the weekend. The flags are rather an indication of an entire network of political operatives that Morena has maintained inside the U.S. for years. And I'll just throw this out there as well. You said, some new evidence happened today. Well, today, the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, thank you. She says, number one, we will always defend Mexicans. All Mexicans must defend our compatriots in the U.S. I mean, this sounds like the signal to, let the sleeper cells must arise now that they've put there. I mean, and then you look at what's happening and you can kind of see the evidence of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So here's what we know for a fact. We know that the Morena regime does maintain party cells in the United States because they've activated them a few times, both for electoral purposes and also for what I would describe as minor protests in the U.S. We know that exists. We know that the Mexican ruling regime does believe sincerely, and I've sat in meetings, across the table as close as we are, and had very, very senior Mexican officials tell me. In fact, I had one person tell me that the United States will never act against Mexico because, and this is almost a direct quote, there's 30 million Mexicans in the United States who will defend their country if called upon. Well, I mean, I'm one of them, right? I'm not. Trust me on this one. Like most aren't, but it doesn't take that many to cause a problem. So yes, that network exists in the U.S. And I would say, if there's no direct connection with what's happening in LA, I mean, you can't make the case that, or at least not that I know of, it's not possible to make the case that like an order went out from Mexico City. But what you can make the case directly from the quotes that you've cited, and also Mexican political rhetoric going back for years and years, is that the Mexican state does and has, for the past decade, asserted a positive political active interest in Mexican nationals and also ethnic Mexicans in the United States. I mean, supposedly I'm protected by this, which is completely ridiculous. And, a lot of the reason that you see a little bit of panic right now in Mexico City ruling circles is that suddenly Americans are paying attention to how they've always spoken. They've always said this. We just haven't taken them seriously, and now we're overdue in doing so.
Derek, this is another angle or another aspect of this I want to get both your comments on. I don't know if you've seen some of this bubble up recently, but maybe it's one of those things where I ignored it until you're told about it, and then you see it everywhere. Does Mexico still think they own part of the U.S.? going back to 1830. You had the Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued this statement, which said, the government of Mexico will continue using all available diplomatic and legal channels to express its opposition to practices that criminalize migration and endanger the safety. So opposition to practices that criminalize migration, not that criminalize legal migration. They're not making a difference between legal and illegal. They're just saying all migration, they're going to oppose it. That would suggest that they think they still own California and that any migration from Mexico to California is lawful, right? And then you have, literally just the last couple of days, you have the president of the Mexican Senate literally holding up an 1830 map of Mexico and saying, we build the wall and we'll build the wall and pay for it, but we'll do it according to the 1830 map of Mexico. Mexicans were settled in these territories before the U.S. The Mexicans living there are in what has always been their homeland, and there are other multiple examples of this coming up in the last few days.
Well, I first I became aware of this theory. One of the public intellectuals I follow had a social media post about this. An individual named Katy Perry had called attention to it on her Instagram.
Known international expert, Katy Perry.
And cartographer,
astronaut,
and that is true.
Astronaut,
that is true.
yeah.
And cartographer.
Yeah,
apparently, a cartographical expert, Katy Perry, posted that nonsense on her Instagram, which of course I always find it funny because if you know the history of Mexico, and I don't think that you have to be as well read on it as Josh per se, but like last I checked, the colonization of the areas in California and that of which they speak was actually the conquistadors, and it's.
Oh, and they came direct from Spain. Jaén. They came from a town called Jaén in Spain. They would say, "What's a Mexican? You mean the Indios back in the Valle de Mexico in 1781 when they found Los Angeles?" No,
so that's what I'm wondering. It's like the left taking up the side of the colonizers is always an interesting one. Mm-hmm. But that's it. That is the most ridiculous thing. My retort to using the 1830 maps is, what happened since 1830? I mean, we need to get Polk on here to explain that to us, or what's going on?
They really do think, and again, I want to bifurcate, and I want to be very explicit. I'm not talking about like the mass of 130 million Mexicans. I'm talking about this elite regime and its ideology. Mm-hmm. They really do think they still have the Mexican cession. They really do think that California, Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and so on are fundamentally, on a blood and soil basis, seriously, Mexican territory.
Well, there's a fundamental European understanding of nation.
Well, yeah, it kind of is. But they deploy it when it's of use to them. I'll put it that way. They're zealous in the defense of their sovereignty from us. They're totally non-zealous in the defense of sovereignty from their own criminal cartels, and they're totally happy with infringing upon ours. And so they really do believe in this sort of like this mystic homeland that is ancestrally Mexican. Now the Mexicans have reclaimed it. They've risen up. Set aside that the California population, like if you wanted to, there are people who have continuous occupation and descent in modern day California that goes all the way back to the late Bourbon era colonization of Alta California, but it's a very small population. Mm-hmm. It's not like South Texas where there are thousands upon thousands of families who have 300 years of residence there. It's just a fundamentally different issue. So the individuals that we see protesting there, frankly, these are guys who were straight from Oaxaca, or whose dads come from Guerrero, or whose mom came out of Jalisco, and in no sense are they actually native to California. In no way.
So on one side, while there might be a collusion between the Mexican government and the cartels to have operatives and other various infrastructure in the United States to protect their financial interests, right? There's that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of combining with also the far left antagonist. Mm-hmm. We know the Soros-backed groups. We know the troublemakers, all of that. And we're seeing, like, not just in L.A., but now those groups are trying to foment riots and disorder in dozens and dozens of cities across the U.S. Do you see any, while they might be linking up efforts at the moment, just because they sort of intersect, do you see them actually working and colluding together, or do you think that the troublemakers and the antagonists are simply just exploiting the situation, what's going on and with ICE?
Well, it's both and, right? They are working together and they're acting opportunistically. And we can give examples from the past on that. For example, when we had a lot of the crescendo points of the migrant crisis that's temporarily in abeyance. It's coming back, by the way, but temporarily in abeyance right now. A lot of what we saw was U.S.-based and frankly Anglo-run NGOs out of places like Dallas or the Rio Grande Valley that would actually organize these migrant caravans in Mexico, which then, of course, were controlled by cartel traffickers, which then fed money into the state and so on. And so it's a pretty sophisticated and wide-ranging apparatus. We shouldn't understand it as centrally directed. I mean, there is some central
sort
direction
of the
at
enemy
the state
of my
level.
enemy is my friend kind of thing?
Sort of, yeah, but it's
organic and manifestation.
It's organic, yeah. That's probably the right way to put it. It is a networked threat, and it should be for anybody who's studied, for example, terrorist organizations or traditional organized crime. It should look very familiar because that's kind of how it is with the added persona of state sponsorship and NGO participation.
So before we get to solutions, I want to bring it back to Texas and specifically, Austin, because literally the protest that happened here in Austin last night happened just a couple blocks from here. But we all hear this, that there's going to be a big protest or a mass protest or something, and we all kind of, I don't know if we a lot of us mock it because it just doesn't Texas is a different place, I think, in that respect. Like, it just doesn't manifest the same way it might in a place like Baltimore, Washington D.C., or certainly L.A. or Chicago, a place like that. Is it just there's something about the Texas culture that it's like, no matter if it's Houston or Dallas or Austin, people go, they scream, they yell, whatever. There was a dozen arrests, but it was for things like vandalism and, resisting arrest or impeding an arrest or something like that. Just basic stuff. It wasn't Molotov cocktails.
Yeah.
Do you think it's just because, look, this is Texas and that kind of thing just doesn't happen here, or because the governor or even the Austin, police department and frankly, we owe them a debt of gratitude last night because nothing really got out of hand. Do you think it's part of, and jump in on either one, is it part of the Texas culture, Derek, that just we don't do that here, Well,
I think there is a cultural antecedent to that, but I also think that if you look at specifically during the Austin protests, I'd hate to be the chief financial officer for Golden Corral when they actually have these protests, because your entire elderly client base is spilled out onto the streets. Same thing for the people that dye hair blue. It's an effect non-protest, and we see this time and time again. And now that we're in this realm of the meta protest of, so I was about to say we had, what was it, anti-ICE, trans, Gaza, climate.
Some BLM
I think,
in there.
Yeah, that's the wrong person. One survivor on season 4. Every shared collective grievance we see be manifested. And like, here's the thing: when I think it was Jonah Goldberg who refers to many groups on the left now as the unamalgamated left-wing blob. And that's all we see. I mean, there's no differentiation in the message. So that's why when we see folks with a Gaza flag, shutting down a highway, people are moving in the other way on that particular social question.
And so on the one hand, Josh, the side that's like, well, we don't really do that here. We're not going to go out and destroy buildings and blow up stuff. But on the other hand, this is Texas, and we don't put up with that here either. And so if it even got even remotely down that road to something like L.A., just the culture and the attitude here would be squash it immediately, disperse the crowd, get rid of them.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Derek said, and I think it's all true. And I agree with you that there is just a Texas civics difference here, and that we don't do that kind of thing. And there's one other element that California does not have, and it is I've alluded to it previously. It's the nature of our Mexican American population, which is not new. With minor exceptions, you've got 3 major blocks of settlement in Texas of Mexican Americans. There's the El Paso, which is really a New Mexican block, San Antonio, which is 1720s, 1730s, and then you have the Nuevo Santander block, which is essentially everything south of the Nueces River. So it's Laredo, the Rio Grande Valley. And these are all very rooted communities. Now, they behave different politically. San Antonio is very to the left. The Chicanismo took root there in ways it didn't elsewhere. But you're not going to get folks in Laredo or McAllen or Corpus Christi to come out for these causes. And that's where the population, the historic Mexican-American population base is, because they're fundamentally conservative and they support deportations.
We'll you want to jump into some poll questions real quick, or some new polling that just came out. 58% support. This is after the riots have started, or in the last 24 hours or so. 58% still favor the Trump administration's efforts to deport illegal immigrants. Just 37% say that the administration's deportation efforts have gone too far. So the political question here, which is, I've got some insight on this because I asked another one of our experts about this, is looking at this is what happens all the time when the left creates this kind of disorder, whether or not the people believe in the cause necessarily or in the policy, they really react poorly to disorder. And so you'll see this kind of thing happen where Trump will get a bump in his poll numbers, or even the policy will get a bump. Deportation, of course, as we know, has been off the charts supported over the last year and a half or so. Is this backfiring on the left by causing this kind of disorder, which apparently the American people oppose?
Too early to say. I don't think we've talked about this with several friends in the past several days. Right now, I don't think any party to the conflict has an incentive to de-escalate, except maybe Gavin Newsom, and I'm not even sure that's true for him.
He put out a 45-second video today. I don't know if anybody saw that, but to put out
denouncing violence,
violence, and so essentially it's just a kind of a PR thing that he had to do it to be able to say he did it. But
so he can keep coming on Rogan or whatever,
or
whatever
Charlie Kirk's show or something.
Yeah, Newsom will end up on every side of the issue given sufficient time. I'm just not sure anybody is playing to a general audience. I think from a performative standpoint, it's still pretty niche, and so are they losing? Probably. But do they perceive themselves as such? I don't think so.
Yeah, Derek, I asked our another resident expert here, Chuck DeVore. I asked him the same question. I said, what's their end game? If they know this is going to happen, because we saw this with BLM, we see this with climate stuff when people block roads and all of that. If they know that the disorder is going to create a backlash against their cause, why do they do it in the first place? And he said they want the martyr. They want the violence. They want that moment when things escalate to a point to where somebody thinks they hear a gunshot, or maybe there was a real gunshot, and all of a sudden the good guys end up firing back. They kill somebody. Perhaps it's not a troublemaker. It's the wrong person. It's there's a real martyr in this fight, and then they'll latch on to that and say, "See what an awful government you are because this person got wrongly murdered as they were just protesting or whatever." That they're willing to go through this point of Americans, opposing their efforts because they're looking for that person who gets shot, and then they'll use them as a martyr for their cause.
And far be it for me to disagree with Chuck, and because Chuck's a very thoughtful person in these matters. I think that's a little bit too determinative, and it presupposes a level of, I wouldn't say even thinking of the id that I don't think the left necessarily has earned the right to have ascribed to it. And I don't think that's not a...
That's too galaxy brain for the blue hairs?
Not even galaxy brain, but I'm talking about the one where it's just the larger brain and the guy has a pipe. You know that meme?
I mean, maybe they're looking
but he's
back...
not playing chess with himself, that the chess is also the brain.
But we still talk about Kent State, right? I mean, that we still talk about...
I'm from Ohio and we don't talk about Kent State.
Well, you hear it. I mean, but people point
Especially
to that.
in sports.
People point to that and say that's kind of where things might have turned. If you look at the historical timeline where things might have turned, and the public,
right.
maybe they're already against the Vietnam War. Who knows? But that definitely was a moment that people always drag up because 4 people got shot.
Well, they do, and then what happened a few months after that is Richard Nixon wins 49 states.
Yeah.
Well, if Trump could only run again, I guess.
Easy.
Next show.
But all that to say is, I think, and to Josh's point from earlier, is a lot of this stuff is emergent. It's not, there is no central command to it. And so I think were the martyr incident to happen that you describe, I think it may redound to their benefit. It may, but I don't think that's the probable outcome. I think that, especially with the way, that we started seeing polling that was commissioned by certain, third way types during the BLM stuff back in 2020, back then people were tired. That was 5 years ago. Back then, people were tired of this nonsense. They were just like, we're done. We don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of the social unrest. So I think that by pressing for the martyr, if that's what they do, it is ultimately counterintuitive for the goals that they had. But then again, not everybody is as smart as Katy Perry.
If your outcome is to generate, though, the apparatus and the personnel for a sustained insurgency type operation, this will do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If someone got martyred or killed or, God forbid.
Even if violence at its current level persists over a period of time, if you can sustain that activity in the face of the state, then that gets you a whole different cohort of people who emerge over time, and that's very dangerous.
But it's also radicalizing normies, is my point.
It is. That's true. But,
radicalized normies this way.
That was true, and I don't disagree with you, but I'm just saying, like, the two can coexist, and they have historically in a variety of places, and it's a problem.
So our position collectively, the center can't hold?
Essentially, yeah.
Which is why you might hear Trump, although I'm sure he believes this, to quell these invasions, insurgencies, whatever, quickly, to put them down quickly, and that's why he sent in the National Guard the next day. But I'm sure he's on the phone with governors as well, at least the ones that'll take his call, and say, hey, you guys got to make sure this doesn't get out of hand for that kind of reason. We can't have these sustained, this can't be a month or 2 month into it. You've got to knock this down immediately.
His theory, his escalation theory is correct. It's better to go in hard and full, with maximum force right now at the inception versus slowly convolute later. Doesn't mean it'll work though. But, yeah.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, a great example of that is Columbia still has encampments.
Yeah.
University of Texas does not.
Yeah.
Good point.
Right.
Good point. All right, it goes into the end of the show, and so I'm going to ask you, Josh, two questions at once. Talking about solutions, what tools does the United States have? Let's get back to Mexico and international and Mexican operatives here and all that, and the working with the cartels. What tools does the United States have that it can leverage? What kind of policy recommendations would you have for the United States to be able to leverage? I don't say against Mexico, but in that conflict.
Yeah.
But then even more specifically, because we're Texas, what tools does Texas have to be able to leverage, perhaps against Mexico, or just to ensure that we're protecting our people and not letting things get to the point the way they are in L.A.?
Yeah. No, it's as you know, and it should be clear at this point, I think the Mexican state is the hinge of the entire thing, and so accountability's got to be brought to bear on the Mexican state. And if there's insurrectionaries flying Mexican flags in the United States, then the consequences have to be felt in Mexico. It's just period, full stop. And the state can cooperate with us or not. And so what we need to do is we need to look at the points of leverage that we have, which are many. We actually do hold all the cards versus the Mexican regime. The number one card that we hold is reauthorization of USMCA, which is the successor to NAFTA. It's the free trade agreement with Mexico. If that were to end tomorrow, the Mexican economy would maybe have 6 to 8 weeks of life left to it. It's that catastrophic. And it strikes at the one thing that the regime cares about, which is money. It's not the welfare of their people. It's not being a good neighbor. It's not good governance. It's money. And we should threaten that reauthorization. The reauthorization is due no later than July 1st, 2026. The renegotiations start in September or October, depending on who you talk to in Washington, D.C. And it should be held in abeyance. It should be withheld, frankly, unless the Mexicans deliver security concessions of a truly epic quality that I doubt they'd be willing to do.
Has USMCA traditionally had a security component, or is it just purely economic?
USMCA, that's a great question. So USMCA, if you consider it contiguous with NAFTA, which it really is, so NAFTA signed in 1994, the entire
I think you have to do a Ross Perot impression if you're going to talk about NAFTA.
But like the sucking sound and like the graph that like holds up the jobs. So he turned out to be right about it, though. I mean, except for South Texas, where we got new jobs for it. If you consider it contiguous with NAFTA, the answer is yes, to the extent that it was premised upon a Mexico that was going to continue to liberalize, that was going to continue to develop as a state, and that was not going to fall into mass violence. And that was also going to continue to have a civics that was amenable to law-ordered foreign investment. None of that has come to pass. And so the premises undergirding NAFTA in 1994, and frankly even the premises that were undergirding USMCA in 2018, 2019, no longer pertain. They're not there. And so to get those back, if Mexico wants to continue to enjoy the benefits of trade with us and nearshore manufacturing in Mexico and so on, which delivers billions into the coffers of the drug lords that they care about and the politicians that they care about, then they need to do something to reestablish those conditions. And frankly, we can't trust that they will out of the goodness of their hearts. We've got to be involved. And so we must ask that of them. And if they say no, which I guess they will, we should walk away from the treaty. We can live without them. They can't live without us.
So Texas, what about leverage Texas can use?
It is a very similar set of solutions in Texas. We've been out front, urging that Texas be aggressive and expansive in its constitutional interpretations, understanding what it can do vis-a-vis the border, vis-a-vis extraditions, and so on. And Texas has done a lot of things right. One of the things that I think Governor Abbott did very smartly, and really alighting on a very similar analysis to the one I just presented, which is that the Mexican state cares about trade, is he implemented secondary inspections at various points, which essentially were state operations external to the federally operated ports of entry into Mexico that then essentially ground. I mean, the excuse, which I'll put in quotes, is more inspections for like ag safety and things like that.
What about the avocados?
What about the avocados? Like, how can you live
yeah.
without avocado toast? Like, that's worth sacrificing your liberty for, right?
Yeah.
So he did that. I would say that's the number one tool in the kit. And the secondary tool in the kit is there is a lot of Mexican state property in Texas. The Deer Park refinery outside Houston. I mentioned before, AMLO's got a son who lives in luxury in Houston. There's a lot of civil property out there that is foreign owned and ripe for the seizing.
Derek, Josh says that we have all the cards, and if that card game is not Uno, I think we've really missed an opportunity here. No, in terms of Texas and solutions, I mean, is there at least we're obviously done with session now.
Mm-hmm.
There's not something that like we're going to necessarily call a special session for, because so far, any of the protests have been meager by LA standards. Mm-hmm. But there's a new one coming up. I mean, there's supposed to be a big.
The AFT sponsored one.
Yeah, right. Why is AFT sponsoring anyway? But there's supposed to be a big protest this weekend all over the state. We'll see what happens there. I'm still confident that we don't do that here in Texas. And so, but in case things get out of hand, what measures does Texas have?
Well, and again, if things get out of hand, I don't think you're going to see any sort of sustained lawlessness just because Governor Abbott has already announced that the National Guard was being spun up in order to combat any sort of lawless behavior. And actually, I'll agree with Josh and maybe even go a step further if such is possible. On maybe
you calling him a squish? Is that what I just heard?
I am to his left.
Yeah, noted Mexico squish, Josh Treviño. But no, I would say that I think that, and again, this needs to be clear, that a lot of stuff that we've done in the state, say the 287G agreements, things like that, and while those bills turned out pretty well after all was said and done, those target the symptom of the collapse of the state, not the state or the state of the state to its south of our border itself. What we also should consider doing, and I know this is going to sound hyperbolic, but is that we need to not take any kinetic actions off the table south of the border, simply because we can't actually, protect ourselves if we allow military or paramilitary presence to marshal on the other side of the river, which it has done. Mm-hmm. How many Border Patrol agents or DPS or other federal and state agents have been fired upon already? Mm-hmm. I mean, luckily they obviously, a lot of these folks have clearly gone to the G.I. Joe Cobra School of Marksmanship. But that being said, you can't always pray for just bad enemies. And taking pot shots, I think that's a hostile military act.
There's a now it's not really a town, but it's like a colonia north of Roma, Texas, Starr County, called Fronton, that actually has taken indirect fire from a 50 cal on the Mexican side that was deliberate, designed to terrorize the town because it was a major crossing point.
And why can't we just take that thing out? If they're firing at us, why don't we just blow it up?
Kinetic solutions exist, is my point.
We have every right to do so. The state of Texas has every right to do so. And the fact that we haven't done so yet indicates that there is policy progress we need to make.
I mean, we abducted some of their cartel leaders before. I mean, I use that word, whatever. We extradite. What is the right word? I don't know.
We apparently collaborated with the Chapitos to get El Mayo.
Yeah, we can't take out their hand cannon or whatever they got over there.
We ought to consider doing that. Yes.
Well, I'm just glad that Derek didn't yell at me for saying a special session. So you must know that he's relaxed and he's exhaled from the session and he's
relaxed and arrested and
ready to go for that special session, Governor Abbott, to protect the border. Just kidding.
That is Brian speaking, not Derek.
Josh, this is awesome. This is great to have you here. I'm sure we could go on for another couple hours. Kind of, some things I didn't get to, but if you want more information on all this, Josh is publishing, of course, a lot on our website, and we're talking about this issue pretty much for the last 2 or 3 years. So, and Josh, of all, especially, has been been on the forefront of saying the truth about our relationship with Mexico and fighting to make sure that Americans are protected. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Derek, for being here, and thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as I always like to say at the end of the show, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.